The door clicked shut behind Paula from HR, and the room suddenly felt smaller. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October, and I was sitting across from my supervisor, Daniel Harper, for my quarterly performance review. The office smelled like cold coffee and new carpet. A motivational poster on the wall said something about excellence. I had always thought it was ironic, given who sat underneath it. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, crossed one ankle over his knee, and gave me the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He tapped his pen against the edge of the desk 3 times, slow and deliberate, like he was counting down to something I did not yet see coming. "Ethan," he said, "repeat what you just said about client scalability." I did. I repeated it word for word, the same way I had presented it in our last team meeting. I had been proud of that idea. It was solid, backed by 3 months of data I had pulled together on my own time. Before I continue, we would like you to support our community and help us continue to creating high-quality content. We'd love for you to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps our videos reach a wider audience and inform our algorithm about the type of content you enjoy. If you'd like to stay up to date on our latest videos and be part of our growing community, please hit the notification bell. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more content with you in the future. Daniel's smile widened. He leaned forward. Then, slowly and deliberately, he opened his mouth and repeated my words back to me, but not in his own voice. He stretched out every vowel, dropped every consonant that did not suit him, and turned my plain Kentucky drawl into a punchline. "Try saying it without the farm," he said. Paula stiffened in her seat. The red recording light on my laptop kept glowing. Daniel kept smiling. He had no idea it had already caught every single word. 6 years earlier, I had been sitting in a different conference room, brighter, warmer, with a view of Lake Michigan cutting across the horizon like a blue steel ribbon. Daniel Harper had been the one doing the talking back then. He was not yet my supervisor at the time. He was the senior strategist brought in to recruit me away from my job in Louisville, where I had spent 4 years building client account from scratch and learning every corner of the strategy business. He had flown down personally. I still remembered thinking that meant something. The pitch was smooth. He talked about the Chicago office's growth plans, the new accounts they were chasing, the team they were building around fresh thinking. He talked about culture. "We value authenticity here," Daniel had said, sliding a folder of numbers across the table toward me. "We want people who bring their real selves to work. That's what sets our team apart." I had believed him. I had no reason not to. The numbers were good. The role was a promotion in all but name. And the idea of someone at that level flying down just to meet with me told me I was wanted, genuinely wanted, not just hired to fill a seat. I signed the offer letter 3 weeks later. I packed up my apartment in Louisville, said goodbye to my mother on her porch, and drove north with 2 suitcases and a belief that this was the right move. Now here I was, 6 years later, being told to lose the farm. The first time it happened in public, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday morning strategy meeting, about 4 months before that performance review. There were 11 of us around the conference table, account managers, analysts, 2 visiting clients from a logistics firm we were trying to keep happy. I had prepared a presentation on market positioning that I had worked on for 2 full weekends. I knew those slides cold. I was 3 minutes in when Daniel interrupted me. He did not raise his hand. He did not say excuse me. He simply began talking over me, redirecting the room's attention to himself like a magnet pulling iron filings. "Let me translate that into executive English," he said, with an easy chuckle. A few people laughed, politely, but they laughed. I stopped talking. What else could I do? He was my supervisor. He controlled my reviews. He had the room. Daniel spent the next 4 minutes restating almost everything I had just said, using my data, my structure, my conclusions, but in his own accent, his own rhythm, his own smoothed-out Midwestern delivery. The visiting clients nodded along like everything was crystal clear now that he was the one speaking. He never looked at me during any of it. He looked at the room. He was not clarifying my ideas. He was performing something else entirely. He was showing everyone at that table who had the real authority, and making sure I understood my place in the arrangement. I wrote it down in my notebook that evening. Date, time, exact words. Just in case. 3 weeks after that meeting, Daniel introduced what he thought was a harmless little joke. He set a coffee mug, plain white, slightly chipped, down in the center of the break room table one Wednesday morning. He looked around at the small group gathered there, 4 of us, grabbing coffee before the 9 o'clock call. $1 every time Ethan slips back into country, he said. 2 people laughed. One of them was an account manager named Bryce, who always laughed at whatever Daniel said. The other was an analyst named Courtney, who I think was just nervous. She stopped laughing quickly and looked at her phone. The third person, Ryan Alderman, did not laugh. Ryan was my closest colleague on the team. We had started at the firm within 6 months of each other. He had the desk next to mine, and we had been through 3 difficult account cycles together. He knew the work I did. He had seen the hours I put in. When the others trickled out of the break room, Ryan stayed behind. He looked at the mug. He looked at me. "That's not okay," he said quietly. I remember feeling something loosen slightly in my chest. It was the first time someone had said that out loud. Not in a whisper, not behind someone's back, just directly, to my face, like it was a simple and obvious truth. I nodded. "Just ignore it," he added. I told myself I could do that. I was wrong. That evening, Ryan and I stayed late finishing a report on a retail account that had been giving us trouble for weeks. By the time we locked the files and grabbed our coats, the office was empty and the Chicago skyline had gone dark outside the windows. We stopped at a bar 2 blocks from the office. Nothing fancy, just a corner spot with decent beer and booze that gave you some privacy. We ordered, and after a few minutes of talking about the account, I told Ryan about the performance review. I told him about the drool impression, about the farm comment, about Paula sitting right there and not saying a single word. I told him I had my laptop open during the review. It was standard practice. I always had it open to pull up reports, and that the built-in recorder had been running as part of a habit I had developed when I started noticing things felt off. Ryan set his glass down. "That's documented?" he asked. "Every word," I said. He shook his head slowly. "Ethan, that's more than a bad joke. That's a pattern. You need to document everything. Emails, incidents, dates, all of it." He sounded like someone who understood the stakes. For the first time since the break room mug, I did not feel completely alone in the building. I felt like I had at least one person in my corner. I should have paid more attention to the way he asked about the recording. 2 weeks after that conversation, I was running routine account reports when I noticed something that stopped me cold. I had been pulling together a performance summary across our top client accounts, something I did quarterly to track where my numbers stood. I was looking at the revenue attribution dashboard, the internal system that tracked which accounts were assigned to which strategist and what credit flowed from each one. 3 of my accounts had been reassigned, not removed, not closed, reassigned, quietly, without any notification to me, without any team meeting or explanation. They still showed my original work in the project history. But the active attribution, the part that fed into bonus calculations and performance scoring, now sat under Daniel Harper's employee ID. I ran the numbers twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. The shift had happened over 3 separate dates across the previous 2 months, small enough that you would only catch it if you were looking closely. My quarterly bonus projection had dropped by nearly 20% because of those 3 accounts. Daniel's had risen by a corresponding amount. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I exported every screen I was looking at, saved copies to my personal drive, and printed physical copies that I sealed in an envelope and locked in my car. The next morning, I pulled Ryan aside and showed him the dashboard. He looked at it carefully. Then he looked at me. "That's not a coincidence," he said. I felt validated. I also felt sick. 2 days after I showed Ryan the dashboard, Daniel Harper stopped me in the hallway. It was a Friday morning, just before 10. I was coming back from the printer with a stack of reports, and Daniel was walking in the other direction. He slowed as he approached me, which was unusual. He typically moved through the office like he had somewhere more important to be. He stopped. "I hear you've been raising questions about attribution structures," he said. His voice was even, controlled, not angry, worse than angry. Calm in the way that tells you someone has already thought several steps ahead of you. My chest tightened. I kept my face steady. I've just been reviewing my account numbers, I said. Standard quarterly process. He held my gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable. Good, he said. That's what I like. Diligence. He smiled once, the same smile from the performance review, and walked away. I stood in that hallway for a moment after he left, going over the conversation in my head. Only one person had known about the dashboard. Only one person had been shown those numbers. Only one person had heard me talk about what I had found and what I was thinking about doing with it. Ryan. I did not confront him that day. I did not want him to know I had made the connection. Instead, I went back to my desk, pulled up my documentation file, and added a new entry, date, time, Daniel's exact words, and what they meant. I handled the confrontation carefully. I did not accuse. I did not raise my voice. I waited until the following Monday evening, when the office had mostly emptied, and I found Ryan at his desk finishing up his timesheet. I walked over, sat down in the chair across from him, and kept my voice the same way I would speak to a nervous client, steady and open, no edge in it. I asked him how the week had been. He said fine. I asked him if anything had come up since our conversation. He paused, a small pause, but I caught it. Not really, he said. He adjusted a pen on his desk. He looked at the screen. He did not look at me. That was enough. After 6 years of working beside someone, you learn the shape of how they sit when they are relaxed and how they sit when they are carrying something. Ryan was carrying something. His shoulders were slightly too high. His hands were slightly too still. Daniel mentioned the attribution conversation. I said simply. I was just trying to figure out how that got back to him. Ryan's jaw tightened. Just for a second. I might have mentioned it, he said finally, still not meeting my eyes. Just casually. I didn't think it would go anywhere. I didn't think he'd. He trailed off. He had wanted Daniel's approval. That was it. Something that simple. He had traded my confidence for a few degrees of warmth from a man who collected favors the way other people collected debts. I stood up and went back to my desk. The isolation that settled over me that night was heavier than any of the mockery. I found out about the memo on a Wednesday morning from an HR notification buried in my company inbox. Daniel had filed a formal internal memo the previous Friday, 2 days after our hallway conversation, 1 day after I had confronted Ryan. The memo was addressed to Paulo in HR and copied to Daniel's own manager upstairs. It was 2 paragraphs long and written in the smooth, reasonable language of someone who had thought very carefully about how to sound fair. The subject line read, Staff Conduct, Ongoing Performance Concerns. The body said I had been showing signs of resentment toward the performance review process. That I had been raising questions about team structures in ways that suggested difficulty accepting feedback. That he was flagging this early, in the interest of supporting my professional development. Not one word of it was technically a lie. Every sentence was carefully constructed to be unprovable in either direction. But the timing told the full story. He had not written this memo after noticing a pattern. He had written it after learning that I was documenting a pattern of my own. Ryan's leak had given him the warning he needed. And with that warning, he had done exactly what I should have expected from someone with 6 years of corporate instinct. He had moved first. Now, if I ever raised the performance review mockery or the attribution irregularities, it would look like I was a frustrated employee looking for something to blame. He had turned my evidence into the appearance of a grudge. I sat with that for a long time before I decided what to do next. On a Monday morning in early November, a company-wide email arrived at 8:47 a.m. The subject line was Clean and Professional, Leadership Development, Director-Track Announcement. I read it twice. Daniel Harper had been named a finalist for Director of Strategy, a newly expanded role that would give him oversight of 4 separate account teams, a larger budget, and a seat at the senior leadership table. The announcement cited his client growth numbers, his team management record, and what it called his consistent demonstration of executive-level thinking. Congratulations rolled in on Slack almost immediately. 15 messages in the first 10 minutes, each one more enthusiastic than the last. Colleagues I barely spoke to were tagging him and adding applause emojis. 2 of the VPs commented publicly. I read each message and said nothing. I understood what this promotion meant beyond the title. If Daniel moved into that director role, I would be permanently locked beneath him, not just in reporting structure, but in visibility, in access, in opportunity. Every account I built, every client relationship I maintained, every number I produced would flow upward in his direction. He would have even more control over what got attributed to him. More than that, a promotion would validate everything he had done. It would close the loop. The mockery, the attribution shifts, the preemptive memo, all of it would be buried under a new title and a bigger salary. I opened my documentation file. I added one line. November 4th director announcement. The window is closing. Then I started building what I needed. The meeting invitation arrived on a Thursday, and the subject line made my stomach drop. Conduct review, Ethan Calloway. Attendees, Paula, HR, legal representative, Daniel Harper. I read it 3 times. Then I opened my calendar and stared at the date, the following Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. 4 days away. I spent those 4 days preparing. I did not sleep well. I ate at my desk. I reviewed every document I had assembled, every exported screen, every printed record. I rehearsed in my bathroom mirror the way I used to rehearse client presentations, because I knew that how I carried myself in that room would matter as much as what I brought into it. On Tuesday, I walked in and sat down. Daniel presented his version of events first. He was polished, measured, and generous with the word concerning. He spoke about team dynamics and feedback resistance. He used phrases like growth opportunity and communication gaps. He never once raised his voice. Then Paula read from a written statement. It was from Ryan. Ethan has seemed frustrated lately, it read. Not hostile, not accusatory, just enough to suggest instability. Just enough to make anything I said next feel like it was coming from someone who was already unraveling. I kept my hands still on the table in front of me. The legal representative took careful notes. I said I would need time to submit a formal response. Paula said they would allow it. As I walked out of that building into the November cold, I called the one person I had trusted with every detail of this from the beginning, my employment attorney, Janet Moore. Janet had told me at the start of all this, if they ever try to formally discipline you, that is the moment. That is when you move. Now the moment had arrived. The following week, I was called back in. Same room, same people. But this time there was a single new document sitting on the table in front of Paula, a formal written warning, already drafted, with my name at the top. Paula slid it toward me. It outlined a pattern of disruptive behavior, resistance to performance feedback, and inappropriate questioning of team management structures. It cited the memo Daniel had filed, Ryan's statement, and 3 other incidents that I recognized immediately as ordinary events that had been reframed carefully to fit a narrative. It was the second official disciplinary step. One more incident, as Paula explained quietly, and the company would have grounds for termination. Daniel sat across the table with his hands folded, completely calm. He had built this scaffold piece by piece, and now it was standing, and I was inside it. Ryan was not in the room, but his statement was. It sat in the printed packet like a quiet blade. I picked up the warning document, read it slowly from top to bottom, and set it back down. I'd like time to submit a formal response before I sign anything, I said. Paula looked at Daniel. Daniel gave a small nod. 24 hours, Paula said. I stood up, thanked them both, and walked to my car. Then I called Janet and told her it was time. I went home that evening believing I had already lost. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my documents spread across the surface, looking at everything I had built over the past 2 months. The exported dashboards, the printed records, the audio files sitting in a clearly labeled folder, the timeline of every incident written out in careful, dated language. It was all there, every piece of it. And yet I could not shake the feeling that none of it would matter. The narrative inside that company had already shifted. The memo was in my file. Ryan's statement was in the record. The written warning was drafted and waiting for my signature. When you have been painted as the frustrated employee, the one who cannot accept feedback, cannot adjust, cannot fit the professional culture, then every piece of evidence you bring forward gets filtered through that lens. People see what they have been prepared to see. I poured a glass of water and sat there for a long time in the quiet. My phone buzzed on the table. A text message from Ryan. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down. He did not mean for it to go this far. That was probably true. But he had made a choice, and choices travel in directions we do not always plan for. I did not respond. That night, I opened a new document and started building something different. Not just a defense, but a case. Janet had a phrase she used when I was being too cautious. Don't show them a shield. Show them a door they did not know existed. Over the next 3 days, I built that door. I gathered everything into what Janet and I called the counter dossier. It had 5 sections, and each one was organized the way a good presentation is organized. Simple, clear, and impossible to misread. The first section was my performance metrics. 18 months of account data showing consistent growth, client retention above the team average, and revenue numbers that told a different story than Daniel's review language suggested. The second section was client praise. Direct emails from 4 major clients, unprompted, complimenting my work by name. The third section was the revenue attribution evidence, the exported dashboards with timestamps, printed records, and a clear written breakdown of the 3 accounts that had been quietly shifted under Daniel's ID. The fourth section was the recording transcript, every word from that performance review, typed out in full, with a note confirming that the company's internal policy permitted employees to record meetings for personal documentation purposes. I had looked that up 3 months earlier. I had kept the copy. The fifth section was the policy clause itself, printed and highlighted. I organized it into a clean binder, made 3 copies, and submitted a formal request for escalation to executive review. Because Daniel was on an active promotion track, that request triggered an automatic elevation to senior leadership review. He had not seen that coming. I knew because Janet had warned me he would not. When the executive review committee meeting invitation landed in my inbox, I read the attendee list slowly. Daniel's direct manager, 2 vice presidents, one named Warren Briggs, who oversaw strategy operations, and one named Elaine Nakamura, who handled talent and culture. Paula from HR, a legal representative, and one name I had not expected, a culture audit observer from the company's external compliance firm. That last name changed everything. This was no longer a contained internal matter. The presence of an outside observer meant this meeting would produce a formal record that existed beyond the company's own filing system. Whatever happened in that room would be documented in a way that could not be quietly amended later. I called Janet that evening and read her the list. There was a pause on the line. Ethan, she said carefully, they may not fully understand what they've set in motion. When a promotion candidate is named in an escalation that involves external oversight, the committee has no choice but to treat it seriously. It's a liability issue. I asked her what that meant practically. It means Daniel cannot walk into that room and charm his way through it, she said. The rules are different now. Ryan saw the invitation too. He was not on the attendee list, but word traveled in that office the way weather moves, fast and without asking permission. I saw the change in his face the next morning. The easy confidence he had been wearing since he submitted his statement was gone. He was beginning to understand the size of what he had helped trigger. The morning of the executive review meeting, I arrived at my desk at 8 o'clock to find that my system access had been suspended. I typed in my credentials and got a gray screen with a single line of text. Account under compliance verification. Please contact IT. I sat very still for a moment. Then I called IT. The representative told me my account had been flagged for a routine compliance check and that it should resolve within a few hours. He said it in the calm, rehearsed way of someone reading from a script someone else had written for him. I understood the message clearly. If I could not access my files, I could not pull up any of the documentation I needed for the meeting. If I showed up without my materials, I would look unprepared. If I looked unprepared, I would look exactly the way Daniel's memo had described me. Disorganized, reactive, difficult. But I had printed backups. I had my laptop loaded with offline copies. I had the binder Janet and I had assembled, sitting in my bag in 3 complete sets. I did not need the company system. At 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the meeting, my system access was restored. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet return to normal as if nothing had happened. I packed my bag, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the elevator. Whatever they were trying to make me feel on the way into that room, I had decided I would not feel it. The conference room on the executive floor was different from the ones downstairs. It was larger, quieter, with a long oval table and chairs that actually fit properly around it. The windows looked out over the city from a height I rarely visited. Warren Briggs sat at the far end. Elaine Nakamura sat to his left. Paula was near the door. The legal representative had a yellow notepad. The culture audit observer, a composed woman named Nora who introduced herself simply and said nothing further, had a slim laptop and a small recording device of her own, which she placed on the table without comment. Daniel was already seated when I arrived. He had come prepared too. A printed packet in front of him, his own notes, the kind of professional calm that is rehearsed rather than felt. He presented first. He talked about team dynamics. He talked about his management approach and the importance of consistent standards. He used the word clarity 5 times. He used the phrase growth-oriented feedback twice. When Warren Briggs asked him whether there had been any interpersonal friction on the team, Daniel said only that some employees found accountability challenging. He did not look at me directly during any of this. When Elaine asked about Ryan's written statement, Daniel described him as an objective colleague who had flagged genuine concerns. I sat and wrote 2 words in my notebook. Not yet. The floor would come to me. I was going to make sure it landed the right way. The moment I had been dreading arrived just before 11 o'clock. The legal representative set down his pen and looked up from his notepad. He had been quiet and careful through the entire first hour of the meeting, taking notes without expression. Now he looked at Paula and asked a direct question. Is termination currently under consideration for Mr. Calloway? Paula glanced at Daniel, just briefly, before answering. If the documented pattern continues, she said, that outcome is being evaluated as part of the formal process. Warren Briggs wrote something on his notepad. Elaine Nakamura did not write anything. She looked at me instead, in that steady way that people look at you when they are deciding what they actually think rather than what they have been told. The culture audit observer, Nora, typed something quietly on her laptop. My vision narrowed slightly. Not from fear. I had gone past fear somewhere around 4 in the morning the night before. From focus. The kind of focus that arrives when you realize the moment you have been preparing for is no longer hypothetical. I thought about every weekend I had given to that company. Every late call, every reworked presentation, every client I had kept in their corner through pure relationship work. I thought about my mother's porch in Louisville and the night I drove away from it because someone had told me I was valued. I placed my hand on the laptop beside me. May I respond now? I asked. Warren nodded once. I opened the screen. I moved the cursor to the file. I pressed play. The room changed the moment the audio began. First came background sounds, the hum of the office building's ventilation system, the small noises of a room settling into quiet. Then came my voice, reading a sentence about client scalability, steady and clear, with the same Kentucky cadence it had always carried. Then came Daniel Harper's voice. Try saying it without the phong. Nobody moved. I let the silence sit after those 6 words, because silence after something like that does more work than any explanation I could have offered. Then the recording continued. You don't want clients thinking we hired you off a tractor. Still no one spoke. No shifting in seats. No polite coughing. No reaching for a water glass. Elaine Nakamura set down her pen. Warren Briggs stopped writing. The legal representative looked at Daniel. Daniel had stopped smiling. I watched his face go through several things in rapid sequence. Surprise, calculation, and then a kind of stillness that was different from the controlled calm he had worn all morning. This stillness came from a different place. It came from a person realizing that the ground they were standing on was not solid. Paula's hands were flat on the table in front of her. She was very carefully not looking at Daniel. Nora, the culture audit observer, was looking at her recording device and then at the room, and I could see her making a decision with her expression, the decision that this was no longer a routine documentation exercise. I reached forward and paused the file. There is more, I said quietly. Would you like me to continue? Daniel recovered quickly. I had expected that. That's taken out of context, he said, his voice returning to its even register almost immediately. This is a selective clip from a longer conversation. I have the full recording, I said. I looked at Warren Briggs as I said it, not at Daniel. Warren was the one who mattered in this room. I played the complete, uncut review. 22 minutes. Every word Daniel and I had exchanged, from the moment Paula walked in to the moment I left. There was nothing edited. No jump cuts, no gaps. Just the entire conversation, in order, including a section near the end where Daniel described my communication style as regional, a word he used the way someone uses a word when they want to mean something else but cannot quite say it out loud. When it finished, I opened my laptop screen to a specific page of the company's internal HR handbook. I had bookmarked it weeks earlier. I read the relevant clause out loud. Employees were permitted to record meetings for personal documentation purposes with the understanding that such recordings could be submitted as part of formal review processes. Paula confirmed it without being asked. Her voice was quiet. That policy is current, she said. The tone of the room had completed its shift. When we had all sat down that morning, I was the subject of an investigation. Now I was not. The room's attention had moved, slowly, unmistakably, the way a tide moves, toward the man sitting across from me. Daniel straightened his jacket once. He did not speak again for several minutes. After the recording, I opened the second section of my binder. I'd also like to address the performance metrics that have been used to support the written warning, I said. I walked Warren and Elaine through 18 months of account data, not as a complaint, but the way you present a client case. Clean numbers, clear trends, no embellishment. My client retention rate over that period was the highest on the team. 3 of my accounts had grown by over 30% in annual contract value. I had brought in 1 new account entirely on my own, through a relationship I had built before the attribution shifts began. Then I laid out the attribution evidence. I showed them the dashboard screenshots with their timestamps. I showed them the dates on which each of the 3 reassigned accounts had changed hands in the system. I placed those dates beside Daniel's employee ID in the revenue records and showed how the numbers matched. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. Warren Briggs leaned forward. Why were these attribution shifts not communicated to Mr. Calloway or documented in any formal reassignment record? He asked. He was asking Daniel. Daniel opened his mouth and closed it again. There were operational reasons, he said finally. Can you elaborate? Warren asked. There was a pause that stretched several seconds past comfortable. I would need to review the specific files, Daniel said. Warren looked at Elaine. Elaine looked at the audit observer. Nora was typing steadily. At 12:14 p.m., Warren Briggs called a recess. The executive stood and filed out of the room without looking at either of us. Paula went with them. The legal representative closed his notepad. The culture audit observer gathered her equipment and followed, though she paused at the door for just a moment and glanced back into the room. Not at me, not at Daniel, but at the table itself, as if she was reading something written there that the rest of us had not finished reading yet. Then the door clicked shut. Daniel and I were alone. We sat at opposite ends of the oval table in silence. I could hear the ventilation system again, the same low hum from the recording. Outside the windows, the city went about its business in the early afternoon light, 30 floors below us, entirely unaware. Daniel was looking at the surface of the table. After about 2 minutes, I heard a sound from my right. Ryan was standing in the doorway. He had apparently been waiting in the hallway and had pushed the door slightly open. His face was different from the version I had seen all month. Not the careful, managed look of someone navigating an office dynamic, but something younger, smaller, stripped of its strategy. He said my name. Then he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at him. I had spent 3 weeks deciding what I would say to Ryan when this moment arrived. What I actually said was nothing. I turned back toward the windows and waited for the executives to return. When the committee came back, Warren Briggs did most of the talking. He said the meeting had produced significant findings that required further review. He said the company took workplace culture seriously and that the recordings and documentation I had submitted would be formally entered into the HR record. He said that the conduct warning issued against me was being voided, effective immediately. Then he said that Daniel Harper was being placed under a leadership review process pending further investigation. Not suspended. Not removed. Under review. I kept my face even. Elaine added that the Director of Strategy promotion process was being paused for all candidates while the review was active. She said it carefully, the way you say something when you want the sentence to do work without using specific names. Paula said nothing. Daniel sat with both hands flat on the table and a look that was very carefully arranged into calm. But I had been watching his face for 6 years, and I knew the difference between his real calm and the kind he manufactured. This was manufactured. Underneath it, something had broken. I thanked the committee. I gathered my materials into the binder with steady hands. As I stood, Warren Briggs said he hoped this could be resolved to everyone's satisfaction. I nodded once. I walked out of the building, stood on the sidewalk in the November air, and called Janet. They voided the warning, I said. Good, she said. That's the first move. Now we watch what they do next. I already knew what they would do next. 3 days later, HR called Ryan in for a formal re-interview. I was not present for it. I learned what happened through a brief summary that Paula sent me as part of the official case file update, a single-page document with the interview highlights laid out in neutral, careful language. But the key line was simple and unambiguous. Under formal questioning, Ryan had admitted that he had repeated my concerns about the attribution dashboard to Daniel Harper, not accidentally, not in passing, but because, as he told HR, he had wanted to remain in good standing with his direct supervisor. That admission entered the official record. There it was, the thing that had been between us since that Friday hallway conversation, finally named, dated, documented. Not a rumor, not a suspicion, not something I had imagined in the quiet of my kitchen the night I sat with Ryan's text and did not respond. It was a fact now, and facts inside a formal HR record have a different kind of weight than the ones that live only in your memory. I do not know exactly what Ryan felt sitting in that interview room. I know what I felt reading the summary. Something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but something in the neighborhood of both. A closing, a confirmation that I had not been wrong about any of it. The betrayal was now documented, which meant that every chain of events that had followed it, the preemptive memo, the conduct review, the written warning, the near termination, was also documented as something constructed on a foundation of deliberate deception. The culture audit escalated faster than I expected. Nora's Fame submitted a preliminary findings report to the executive team within 5 business days of the meeting. I was not given a copy of the full report, but Janet had contacts in compliance circles, and what came back to her was enough. The recording had not just documented one incident. In the context of the full case file, the attribution irregularities, the preemptive memo, the conduct warning built on a colleague's leaked information, the recording became the clearest piece of a pattern that went well beyond a single performance review. The culture audit team had expanded their scope. They were now looking at a broader set of questions about how performance reviews in the strategy division were documented, how attribution decisions were made, and whether there was a systemic gap between what the company's policies said and how management was operating day to day. Daniel's director promotion was not just paused. On the 14th day after the executive review meeting, an internal announcement went out. It said the Director of Strategy shortlist had been revised due to conduct findings identified during a review process. It did not name Daniel directly. It did not need to. Every person in that office had been following the situation, and everyone knew exactly whose name had been on that shortlist. I read the announcement at my desk. Slack went quiet. No congratulations this time. No applause emojis. Just silence, and then the sound of people getting back to work. The day the promotion announcement was revised, I happened to be in the break room when the Slack notification came through. I watched it happen in real time on my phone, the small ripple of silence moving through the open-plan floor like a wave. Conversations paused. Screens were checked. A few people glanced toward Daniel's office, where the blinds had been half closed since the executive review meeting. By that afternoon, the word had traveled. I did not enjoy it the way I had imagined I might. Back in October when I first understood what was happening, there was no surge of triumph, no satisfaction in watching someone's career take damage the way mine had been threatened to. What I felt was quieter than that. Something close to the feeling you get when a long illness finally breaks and you wake up one morning and realize the weight is gone. That evening, Janet called. The culture audit has expanded to divisional scope, she told me. The company is going to want to be seen doing the right thing publicly now. That means they are going to need someone to point to. Someone who represents what the right kind of leadership looks like. She paused. They are going to come to you, Ethan. When they do, be ready. I had been ready since the night I sat at my kitchen table with a water glass and a recording file and decided I was not going to accept someone else's version of who I was. Daniel requested a meeting 2 days before the formal leadership announcement. He came to my desk on a Thursday afternoon and asked if I had a few minutes. I said yes, and we walked to one of the smaller conference rooms on the second floor, the plain ones, the ones without city views or oval tables. He closed the door. He did not sit down. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the gray November sky for a moment before turning to face me. You destroyed my career over a joke, he said. His voice was not loud. It was tired. I had thought about what I would say in this moment. I had imagined several versions of it over the previous weeks. The careful version, the measured version, the version where I was generous and he was chastened and we both said something mature about moving on. What I actually said was simpler than all of those. You built your career on it, I said. Not on one joke. On the daily work of making certain people feel small so that he could feel larger. On performance reviews designed to diminish rather than develop. On attribution structures adjusted quietly in the dark. On a colleague's willingness to trade a friend's confidence for a supervisor's approval. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. He had no response. Not because he did not understand what I meant, but because he did. He nodded once, very slightly, and walked to the door. He did not say anything else. The formal announcement came on a Monday morning, at the same 8:47 a.m. slot where the director shortlist had appeared 3 weeks earlier. Leadership Update, Strategy Division Interim Lead. My name was in the subject line. Elaine Nakamura had drafted it. It was clean and direct. It said that I was being appointed Interim Strategy Lead effective immediately, that I would be reporting to Warren Briggs during the transition period, and that the role carried full team leadership responsibilities across all 4 account groups in the division. I was sitting at my desk when the notification came through. Down the row, I heard the Slack channel begin to move, carefully at first, then more openly. Genuine congratulations this time, not the reflexive kind, from people who had watched what had happened and formed their own quiet opinions about it over the past several weeks. Paula stopped by and offered her hand. I shook it. Warren Briggs came down from the executive floor and introduced himself properly, as if we were meeting for the first time rather than the third. He said the team was glad to have leadership stability. I held the first team meeting that afternoon. I stood at the front of the room and spoke the same way I had always spoken. Same cadence, same words, same Kentucky drawl that had been used as a punchline in a jar on a break room table and a reason to look past me. No one corrected it. No one translated it. No one laughed. The room simply listened. I accepted the interim role on Tuesday and signed the external offer on Thursday. The outside firm was a strategy consultancy 3 times the size of my current company, with clients in 8 countries and a senior director position that had been open for 4 months. They had reached out 6 weeks earlier, during the worst of the conduct review period, through a recruiter I had spoken to once before. At the time, I had not been ready to think about it. Now I was. Janet reviewed the offer. The title was Senior Strategy Director. The salary was 18% higher than my current base. There was a signing bonus. There was equity. There was a clause that gave me final sign-off on my own team's performance reviews, a detail I had specifically asked for and that they had agreed to without argument. I gave Nexel Communications a 6-week notice period. It was longer than required. I used every one of those 6 weeks well. I corrected the revenue attributions for every account that had been shifted during Daniel's watch. I documented the corrections with full paper trails. I restructured the performance review templates to remove all subjective language about Polish and presence that had no measurable definition and had historically been applied inconsistently. I built transition notes detailed enough that whoever came after me would not need to guess at anything. On my second to last week, Ryan stopped by my desk. He asked, quietly, if I would be willing to give him a reference. I looked at him for a moment. Own one, I said. On my final day at Nexel Communications, I arrived early. I packed what little remained on my desk into a single bag. A framed photo, a small plant that had survived more than it probably should have. The mug from the conference I had attended last spring, the one where I had presented to a room of 300 people and walked off the stage to a standing ovation that I had not expected and still thought about sometimes on difficult mornings. Daniel now reported to a different manager. His team had been redistributed. There was no promotion track, no director title, no expanded budget. He sat in a smaller office on the second floor, and on my way out I passed his door, which was open. He was on a call. He did not look up. Ryan was at his desk. He saw me pass. He did not quite meet my eyes. The security desk returned my badge with a smile and a genuine good luck. My phone buzzed as I walked through the lobby. It was the contract confirmation from the new firm. Senior Strategy Director. Start date, Monday. All terms as agreed. I stepped out into the cold December air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Daniel Harper had spent 6 years treating my voice like a liability. He had mocked it in private and undermined it in public, and handed a jar around a break room table to make sure everyone else saw it the same way he did. He had been so certain that where I was from was something to be managed, smoothed over, corrected. He had forgotten that where I was from also meant I had learned early to keep my word, document my work, and never quit before the job was finished. He tried to make my voice a weakness. It became evidence, and it echoed in an executive boardroom long before his smile ever found its way back.